Prior to 2009, you could be forgiven if you followed Counter-Strike and yet had never heard of Yegor Markelov, a prodigious young AWPer from Ukraine who had yet to come bursting onto the international Counter-Strike scene. Born on February 12, 1988, his competitive Counter-Strike story begins in 2005 when he met Ivan Jonta Shevtsov, who brought him into a team named DTS. It was with the DTS organisation that Markelov played his first LAN, Cybermetal 2005, an event where his team reached the semi-finals. After his early run with DTS, Yegor was one of 5 players that formed the first Hellraisers roster alongside Babu, Phoenix, Basta and Jonta. Eventually, the team replaced Babu and Phoenix with Angel and Valentinich, forming a team that was able to compete with the very best in the CIS region. It was with this roster that Markelov made his first appearance at an S-tier LAN, Hellraisers making it out of the group stage at Code 5 2008. It must be noted that prior to 2010, none of the teams Markelov was a part of were considered competitors on the international scene. However, these teams and the games they played were crucial to developing Markelov into the player that he would become. Unfortunately for Markelov, the Hellraisers team fell to infighting, leading to them going their separate ways. This is a group of players that Markelov has referred to as his dearest and most beloved people, so it's no surprise that they would all eventually cross paths again in the future. They formed the team DTS Shatrix in 2009, but roster changes came quickly as Valek left the team after the Code 5 qualifier in Spain, which was actually a great tournament for the young team. More tumultuous results followed, and by September of 2009, Markelov had been signed to Hellraisers again, this time alongside fellow Counter-Strike legend Edward, with whom Markelov would share the majority of his victories in his career. At the end of 2009, the Ukrainian player Starix received a phone call from a businessman by the name of Murat Tulemaganbetov. Murat proposed to Starix to assemble a Ukrainian team that was to compete amongst the world's elite, and that he would fully finance the team for 6 months. The first player Starix invited to join this team was Edward. Edward in turn recommended Markelov, knowing the quality of the young AWPer. Zeus was brought in to be the in-game leader, and the 5th player was Senya, a friend of Zeus's. The team would be known as Natus Fincer, Navi for short, and would go down as one of the greatest teams in the history of Counter-Strike 1.6. After having competed in a couple of Arbalete Cups under the name Arbalete UA, it must be noted that Arbalete is an organisation owned by Murat Tulemaganbetov. The team arrived at their first S-tier LAN, which is also their first LAN under the banner of Navi, Intel Extreme Masters 4, the first major of 2010. They made it out of groups whilst only losing one map, an 18-12 defeat to SK Gaming. This defeat, however, meant they would have to play a quarter-final rather than going directly into the semis, and they were put up against a Mousesports team featuring Godby and Six. Map 1 went the way of Navi, Map 2 to Mousesports. The third map was Tuscan, and it went all 30 rounds. In the end, Navi were able to close it out 16-14. The semis would see them facing the almost all-American team Evil Geniuses, who featured star players Nothing and Fraud, and were led by the Finnish IGL Lurpis. In stark contrast to their 3-map brawl with Mousesports, this best of 3 finished in 2, with Navi stomping EG on Inferno and closing the series out on Train. They moved on to the grand final, where they would be facing Fnatic, one of the best teams in the world and reigning IEM champions. Navi won Train 16-13, then scraped through Inferno 16-14 thanks to an incredibly clutch performance by the Ukrainian super team.
He's up against 4 from Navi. Surely they're going to kill him, and Navi will win the Intel Extreme Masters Season 4 for Counter-Strike 1.6.
With this win, Markelov and Navi became only the second CIS team to ever win a Counter-Strike major. After a disappointing quarter-final exit at the hands of SK Gaming during DreamHack Summer 2010, Markelov's team went to ESWC 2010 looking to bounce back and compete for the title. They got off to a terrible start, only winning one of their 3 group games, but they still made it through to the playoffs thanks to round differential. Once into the playoffs, things turned around quickly. They dispatched a Fnatic rather unceremoniously, winning 16-12 on Train and 16-1 on Dust 2. Up next they faced MTW, the Danish team of legends Trace and Zonic. Map 1 was Dust 2, and Navi again were able to take it with ease. Map 2 was Tuscan, and was an incredibly close affair, Navi wanting to close out the series in 2, and MTW playing for their tournament lives. The game finished 15-15 in regulation, and went to multiple overtimes before MTW were finally able to level the series, with a final score of 25-23. Those expecting a close Map 3 would be sorely disappointed, with an incredibly one-sided game of Train going the way of Navi 16-1. In the grand final, Navi had a shot at redemption, finally getting another crack at the SK Gaming side who had eliminated them from DreamHack Summer and given them their only loss during their first major run. The first map was Dust 2, and on current form Navi were firm favourites. However, SK were well prepared and won the map 16-11. In response, Markelov and Na'Vi absolutely smashed SK on Train and Inferno, becoming the first team to take any map from SK all tournament long, avenging their past defeats, and being crowned back-to-back major champions. Fresh off their second major win, they also took home first place at Arbalete Dallas 2010, besting Mousesports in the grand final. They had truly found their place amongst the elite after having come out of seemingly nowhere at IEM4 just a few months prior. One of the most important parts of this meteoric rise was the impact of the AWP of Markelov, who was incredibly adept at hitting his shots with great speed and accuracy, completely annihilating and demoralizing his opponents. He also had incredible rifle and pistol play, an anomaly for players in the AWP role at the time. In the 3 months after their second major win and their victory in Dallas, Na'Vi were consistently able to make top 4 at the tournaments they attended, but didn't pick up any more silverware. They came into World Cyber Games 2010 looking to make it a record-equaling third major in a row, and to break the record prize earnings in a year that had been set by Fnatic just 1 year prior. In a complete inversion of the events from ESWC 3 months earlier, Na'Vi breezed through the group stage, which for them was only 1 game, then cruised through their first 2 playoff matches, beating Lions EK, a weaker Swedish roster featuring Exist, Pronax and Threat, and the Spanish Bet4Gamers team 2-0. Finally, in the semis, they ran into some real opposition, matching up against the Frag Executors team of Neo and Taz. Map 1 went to overtime, but the Ukrainians were able to close it out 19-17. Map 2 was Tuscan, and it was a much simpler affair. Na'Vi coming up trumps in the majority of the engagements, and the map finished 16-8. The grand final was to be a rematch of the semi-final from ESWC, with Markelov once again having to face the Danes of MTW. The game was an instant classic. Inferno was won comfortably by Na'Vi thanks to an imperious T-side, then MTW took Tuscan in close fashion, much like they had at ESWC. The deciding map was Train, Na'Vi's home map. And yet, the teams were clearly evenly matched, exchanging 9-6 T-halves to take the map to overtime. This was the highest pressure situation any of these players had faced in their careers to this point. Both teams buckled on their T-sides, unable to execute to their fullest, and the game went to a second overtime. On the second time of asking, Na'Vi's T-side got rolling, finally able to find opening frags on the B-bomb site. They clean sweep the T-side, and entered the favoured CT side only needing 1 round out of 3 to go their way. On the first round of their T-side, MTW pulled off an excellent fake, getting the Bond down on the inner site. However, they were not able to hold off Na'Vi's retake, Markeloff finding the final kill on his way to winning his 3rd consecutive major title. With this win, Na'Vi had completed their transformation from newly formed squad with low expectations to one of the all-time great lineups in CS 1.6. For all of the players on this roster, this was their first foray into the upper echelons of the international scene, and their first major win would have been considered a fluke had they not followed it up with one of the most dominant years in Counter-Strike history. After their 3rd major title, the team kept their foot on the pedal by winning DreamHack Summer, once again besting MTW in the grand final. At the start of 2011, HLTV announced their first ever top 20 players of the year. Markelov was announced as the #1 player, with a 1.22 rating and the 2nd most entry kills, whilst also managing to be the most consistently performing player in the world. A truly incredible feat considering his relative inexperience. Coming into 2011, Na'Vi were able to qualify comfortably for the next major, IEM5 in Hanover. They made it out of their group in 2nd place, dropping a map to Lions Esports Club and drawing one with SK Gaming. In the quarterfinals, they beat down Fallen's Complexity Gaming, winning Inferno 16-10, then strolling through the Brazilians 16-5 on Train. In the semis, they faced a familiar foe. Sadly for MTW, Na'Vi truly found comfort in beating them, so the result was all but a foregone conclusion, 2-1 Na'Vi. Their grand final opponent was Frag Executors, who seemed to have not gotten the memo about allowing the first 2 maps to be Dust 2 and Train, as they joined the long list of teams that had lost that combination of maps consecutively to Na'Vi. To be fair, they did try Tuscan at WCG 2010 and still lost, so there mustn't have been many things left for them to try at this point. The record had now been broken. Na'Vi were the first team to win 4 consecutive major titles in Counter-Strike. As their legend grew, they became near celebrities in Ukraine, meeting with the Prime Minister to discuss the development of the IT industry in the country, and inspiring an entire generation of young Counter-Strike players. Na'Vi went on to make a 5th grand final in a row in the majors, but were unable to secure it over Forest and Get Right's SK Gaming. It was after this period that the team decided to use Starrix as their IGL instead of Zeus, as they had grown wary of Zeus's play. They started 2012 well, winning the IEM Global Challenge over SK in January. Zeus performed very well at this tournament, and eventually was handed back the reins of the Na'Vi team. They lost in the grand final of the last major to be held in 1.6, a 2-0 defeat to ESC that saw Neo take home his 6th major. This major signalled the end of competitive 1.6 to many, but Na'Vi were incredibly late to transition, fearing that the newly released global offensive would be like Source and struggle to take off. However, in November of 2012, the team began training for their first tournaments in CSGO. It took almost the entirety of 2013 for Markeloff to win any significant silverware in CSGO, finally triumphing at Tech Labs Cup 2013. His best result prior to that being a 2nd place finish at StarLadder Star Series 6, behind the rampant NIP roster who were still winning absolutely everything. It also took him moving to a new team to achieve this victory, becoming a part of the CIS super team Astana Dragons, alongside Kucha, Doja, Adren and his old friend Angel. At this tournament, Markelov overcame his old teammates Na'Vi at the second time of asking, as well as beating Taz and Neo's Universal Soldiers team that had thwarted them at the end of CS 1.6. The grand final topped off Markelov's greatest performance of CSGO so far, earning him the MVP of the tournament. Early in 2014, Markelov and the rest of the squad transferred to Hellraisers, the team he had helped bring to prominence over half a decade earlier. He spent 9 months there, qualifying for numerous S-tier events but never quite being able to find the impact required to win one. I must note at this point that Markelov had been able to play at every major so far in CSGO, being invited to the first one, DreamHack Winter 2013, then either making it to a legend spot or coming through in the qualifier. Unfortunately for Markelov, no matter how many times he qualified, he could never place any higher than 5th to 8th at the major in CSGO. In 2015, Markelov was signed to Flipside Tactics alongside Blade, Bondic, World Edit and Simple. At this point, Markelov was no longer a primary AWPer and hadn't been in 2014 either, Kucha taking the AWP the majority of the time in Hellraisers. His role was no longer to be a superstar, but rather to support the other stars so that they could win games for the team. The issue that the team ran into was often a lack of consistent star power, with many of the best CIS players from 1.6 struggling to find the same success in the faster moving game of CSGO. World Edit and Simple were supposed to be the ones to watch in the Flipside team, but World Edit was notoriously inconsistent, and Simple's insane skill level was offset by his frequent clashes with his teammates. Still, through all of the issues, they kept qualifying for majors, becoming the gatekeepers to the top of the scene against whom all aspiring rosters had to test themselves. Markelov's final trophy in Counter-Strike was at DreamHack Open Leipzig 2017. An event where the young Russian Electronic displayed his potential to be one of the best in the world, carrying Flipside to the title over the big side of GOB B.
Gone down and Flipside have done it. They will take it in style 2-0, 16-11 on both maps. Well-deserved champion.
The team, however, were not able to rise to that level again, as low as it was, and they returned to their streak of middling results and qualifying for majors. Finally, 5 years after being invited to the first major, Markelov failed to qualify for the Face It Major London. He had played in all of the first 12 majors, a considerable achievement for a player on teams that were rarely featured in the top 20 of the rankings. With this failure to qualify, Markelov was moved to inactive in Flipside, and he was then cut 6 months later. Whilst there have been rumours of a return to competitive CS, Markelov seems to be retired for good and enjoying the good life. Before Markelov and Na'Vi came along to smash the 1.6 scene into pieces in 2010, the CIS region had a severe lack of success in Counter-Strike, not having won a major since 2002, which many would argue came against weak competition, myself included. Markelov made the game look easy, dominating almost every match he played in, and leading his team to the most successful year in 1.6. In fact, the record of 4 consecutive major titles has never been matched, and it likely never will be if Astralis aren't able to win the next major, whenever that may be. Whilst his CSGO career was one of the most disappointing out of his peers, and his 1.6 career lacking the longevity of Neo or Forest, Markelov managed to forever etch himself into the history books with his uniquely aggressive AWPing style, and his ability to lock down areas of the map almost single-handedly. No AWPer in 1.6 managed to reach the same level of success whilst also carrying such a heavy load for their team. It is a shame that all of those who started playing and watching the game in 2015, well after Markelov's prime, never knew him as the AWPing god he used to be. Those old games and demos will all be lost in time.
Like tears.